Welcome to Talking Down the Highway, a Beach Boys podcast presented by Strange Currencies Music. I'm Matt.
I'm Glenn.
I'm Tim.
Hey. Yeah.
Yo, Mr. S.
Who's Mr.
Hey, Roy.
S?
Homer
Am I missing?
All right.
Well, hey, it's almost time to go back to school.
You say that, and
It's getting there.
and hearing it with the horrible knowledge that by the time this episode drops, we will actually be back and working.
I've been working this whole time.
Loser.
No summer vacation.
Well, hey, I have some happy news to report on. Our dilemma of completing our Beach Boys record collection. You know, there are some like...
You bought that $3,700 copy of Summer in Paradise?
That is one of the wrinkles, but no, I did not.
Damn.
But there are some equally like challenging aspects to completing your Beach Boys collection. But I've checked off one of the ticks that had been looming in my fear. You know, as we're getting ready to go back to school, I was visiting a friend, a colleague at another school in Salem.
Bullshit. We're your only friends.
Well. I was at my buddy's place, and I was checking out his classroom. He's got a record player in the corner of his classroom. I'm like, ooh, where's the collection? And so he's like, oh, it's in that closet. I open up the closet and I'm flipping through, and sure enough, he's got a copy of
The Many Moods of Murray Wilson.
No, he's got a copy of Looking Back with Love.
Oh, wow. And you bought
And
it
I
off
was like, hey, Looking Back with Love. And he's like, you want it? And I'm like, sweet, I don't have to give my love money. I got a copy now.
Wow.
Paid. Apparently he worked with Stan Love.
Oh.
Yeah, he's got some
capacity?
stories. He worked on a radio show, on a talk radio show, and Stan Love was on it.
Okay.
And so he had done stuff in the 90s with them. So apparently he's got some... I'm going to have to drill him for some stories.
Yeah.
We'll see, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I got Looking Back with Love without having to line Mike Love's pockets.
Excellent.
So,
Nice.
thought you guys would appreciate that.
Oh, I mean, I do. It's a great album, right? I think we gave it a... I think we gave it a
John
Charles
Stamos?
Manson.
Manson.
I think it was
Stamos?
a Brian Plus.
Oh,
know?
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right.
Any other news? Any other... What's going on? Do we have listener... We don't do listener updates anymore.
No. One thing in terms of listeners, Spotify does comments now.
What?
Yeah, so listeners of the podcast
We have Spotify comments?
can comment, and this is a really new thing. So we don't have a lot of them yet. I know they're going to start pouring in now, though. We love it, right?
Yeah.
We got a comment from Joseph from the UK.
Ooh, all those UK fans.
It's not Joseph.
Not our Joseph.
Not our drummer Joseph, but unless he spells his name differently.
No.
And I don't think does our Joseph. He doesn't live in the UK.
No.
Yeah. Okay. I know he has to commute a little bit to get here, but yeah. Is
it
Joseph,
raining in the UK, Joseph?
Yeah, he's gonna ring it out
of your socks.
He says, "Hey guys, goes without saying, but loving the podcast. Glad that that's the case. Since this is the only Beach Boys available without resorting to nefarious deeds." Ooh, that's ominous.
What are nefarious deeds?
I don't know.
Do you have to be a nefarious deeder to listen to other podcasts?
Deeder?
Dita.
Anyway,
we believe in nothing.
He's no, that's not nefarious. That's nihilist.
Nihilist. Okay.
Two very different things,
Sorry.
Glenn. You are officially not allowed to wear your Lebowski sweater for 1 year as a result of that.
Okay.
Yeah. He also, though, Joseph, that is, directed us to. He's got shirts. Apparently, the understanding I have is that he's designed a shirt. Yeah.
Well, hey, if I can't wear my Lebowski sweater for a year, I should get some new threads.
This one is it's listed on Kono's Bog store, and it's called the Beach Boys Smile Smile Album Hawaiian Shirt. but it looks
What?
a whole lot like it was
What?
ripped off of our podcast image.
Yes.
I don't know.
What? Let me. Oh my goodness!
But they like removed our faces.
Why
and they
aren't our
changed
faces on that
they
shirt?
changed the titling a little bit.
I kind of like it. I might need to get one of those.
I can absolutely see Glenn wearing
I
these.
would rock that.
I could see Glenn wearing like several of these. Actually,
I might have to fill my closet. It is.
yeah.
Hey, it's time to do some back to school shopping.
They've got there's
We
all
can
kinds
draw
of
our faces in.
Well, if you go back to like related products too, I can see all kinds of things that Glenn would wear. There's a World of Warcraft Hawaiian shirt.
Oh.
I can see you wearing that.
Really?
There's a Schlitz beer palm tree Hawaiian shirt.
yeah, there you go.
I can see you wearing that one.
All right. What are you saying, Matthew?
I'm just saying it's
All right.
Glenn is a Hawaiian shirt kind of guy.
Really? All right. Yeah. No, I have a Hawaiian Dodger shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Hawaiian shirt kind of
I
guy.
could get into that.
Yeah. All
Wait,
right.
I thought.
So, Joseph, thanks for the heads
yeah,
up.
thanks,
Glenn
Joseph.
will be ordering many of these.
I thought people in the UK didn't like Hawaiian shirts. I thought that was like a dumb American thing.
How,
Dumb Americans
Glenn,
wear Hawaiian
why do you
shirts.
have to resort to stereotypes?
I don't know.
Come on.
I don't know.
Come on.
Shut up, Matt.
Americans are dumb.
Shut up, Glenn.
Well, yeah, that stereotype
Yeah,
is pretty true.
Pretty true.
All right. On that note,
Wonderful.
any other?
Are we even having a
musings?
podcast? We've already covered all of the Beach Boys albums.
Yeah, I know.
So
we don't have
what
any
are we even
albums left.
doing
We're
here?
talking about something though. So let's take a quick break and we'll come
Fashion.
back and talk about what it is that we're talking about this week.
We're a fashion podcast.
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back. All right, and we are back talking down the highway. I did tell you guys before, we had multiple comments on Spotify. We have another one. This is from an Adriana, apparently, who asked if we could review Summer Dreams. Is that the 80s movie, maybe?
I don't know
Beach Boys?
actually what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know there's another Beach Boys like movie. I think in the vein of the American Family.
Yeah,
one
the
that-
story of the Beach Boys.
Yeah, Summer Dreams. That's what I thought. I've seen that before years ago, and I want to
1990.
say that's the one that really. I think it frames it around Dennis drowning too.
Okay.
Like I want to say that's the one, and I think that might be the one that
ends
really
right
gave
there.
me the impression that that Brian had destroyed the Smile tapes too.
Okay.
So I think we've alluded to it.
Bruce Greenwood plays Dennis Wilson.
Yeah. Let's see. And then wants to know if we could, if we'd later do Love and Mercy. I don't know about that. But if we do share the inaccurate parts, think it'd be interesting. It might be ridiculous. Could we do a long episode on each member? Wow.
There's a thought.
Although we already talk about them, I think it'd be really cool to get the whole picture in an episode with their personal lives as far as we know. Wow.
I mean, we're definitely doing like a 2 or 3 parter on Bruce Johnston, right?
Well, and Stamos.
oh, well, yeah, of
definitely.
course. Well, that's going to be a whole like 16 episode arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She says, thank you for making me laugh and smile.
Aw.
Sail on sailors.
Aw.
That is super
Two
cool.
references there.
Yeah, that was good.
Excellent.
That was
excellent.
well done, Adriana.
We love the comments,
Yeah.
as we said, and thank you for to all of our loyal listeners, but especially those ones who are taking the time to put such positive comments. And you know what, Adriana, for you this week, guess what we're doing?
Hey!
That's right. We're talking about Love and Mercy.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
We had no plans to do that until
No,
that
we didn't.
comment.
We didn't until that comment
showed up, and then we're like, you know what? Hey, that's a good idea.
That's what we should do. We should just like declare that every episode is our last episode until we get a comment saying what we should talk about.
No, I think we should decide what the topic is
That's dangerous.
2-3 hours before
This
any
is-
recording session.
This is our final episode.
Until.
Yeah, Love and Mercy. Well, hey, we're still chronologically moving along because 2012 was our last episode we talked about.
Correct.
That's why God made the radio, and the next thing to come.
Which they never really told us exactly why. I mean, they provided some hints.
Well, there was we don't really know why God made the radio.
No, we don't.
But music comes from the skies.
I don't think that's how it works. Anyway, sticking with chronology.
So chronologically, the Beach Boys and the Royal Philharmonic do something.
No, we're not wasting our time on that.
Oh, all right. Well, in according to Rate Your Music, in 2018, there's that Beach Boys with some Royal Philharmonic, but we're not doing that. That's just all right. Whatever.
So love, ampersand
Mercy. Is it a biopic?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Definitely. So this premiered at Toronto International Film Festival in 2014, but it came out in America wide release 2015. So we can say really just a couple years after That's Why God Made the Radio, but 2015 sort of technically.
But it feels like maybe this groundswell of the 50th anniversary has renewed interest in the Beach Boys.
Right.
And, one of the things that we have not had about the Beach Boys is any kind of a documentary, or there's never been a film or any kind of movie about the Beach Boys. So we really need one.
Yeah. Right. Well, but what you're saying about that groundswell, I think is right, because this apparently had been sort of in development hell since 1988. Like that was when the first notion of making a movie with this same title was sort of around, but it just kind of never happened. And then there were a couple different versions where now it's gonna maybe star Jeff Bridges, and now it's gonna be this and that, and then never came to fruition.
I could get behind that one.
Yeah, and that was the one I think that Melinda was sort of working on in the early 2000s. Let's see. But that was like the third or fourth kind of iteration of the sort of pre-production.
I could totally see.
I know, like
Jeff Bridges.
I'm now sitting here wishing that's what we.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. So in '88, William Hurt was being talked about to play Brian, with Richard Dreyfuss as Dr. Landy.
Okay, I can see that. Too. Yeah.
And then in 2000, let's see. No, Rolling Stone reported in '99 that Melinda hoped to make a biopic starring Jeff Bridges. So yeah,
it had been coming right off Lebowski at that point. Too.
That sandbox really tied the room together.
The bathrobe era would have been
that
portrayed very well.
Don't piss in the sandbox.
But I want to talk a little bit about the director. So yeah, all of that had happened, and then this sort of 50th anniversary resurgence, and this guy Bill Pohlad is the director. He apparently became obsessed with the Pet Sound sessions, or
the Smile sessions.
No, the Pet Sound sessions.
It's very heavy on Pet Sounds,
and sort of revived the effort to make it a movie. I guess there was a script that he didn't really like, and so he hired a guy named Oren Moverman, I think,
to
write it. He
was the one who did that Bob Dylan,
right.
really kind of out there.
I'm not there.
I'm not there with like 6 different people playing Bob Dylan, so it's kind of like over the top, like existential,
right.
It's really surreal.
Yeah, surreal.
And this one isn't really.
It has those elements.
There's a few moments of it, but they feel. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but they kind of feel out of place.
But Pohlad was gonna just be a producer on it because this
Pohlad or Pollard?
I don't know.
Pohlad.
Pohlad. Robert Pollard. But he's primarily a producer. He's produced a lot of like big movies. He's a big Hollywood producer dude. But Moverman saw that he wanted Moverman to direct it. But he's like, let's let Bill direct it.
Right. Well, I think there's hints of that whole Moverman, like because he ended up writing the screenplay. And there were elements. I think there's even a quote from Pollard talking about how he liked what he had done in the Dylan's.
But
I'm not there, but it was too far. It was too out there. And I think there's been like some. I think if you watched this, I think some people were like put off by having 2 different characters play Brian, having Dano and Cusack.
Right.
But at one point there was even a third. The
kid.
No.
But there's actually three
kid.
people playing.
But there was going to be past, present, and future.
And supposedly Philip Seymour Hoffman was supposed to play bedtime Brian.
Bedridden.
Brian.
I think that would have been too much.
That might have been too much. So they dialed that back a little bit. But that premise is still there, that there's a before Brian, there's a past Brian, there's kind of a present Brian and a future Brian, and it alludes to it too in the movie, like the opening scene with Paul Dano playing the 1960s Brian Wilson, and he's kind of hearing these voices and all of the music's in his head, and it builds up, and then boom, it cuts to Brian in bed. Brian present, and it kind of like has that almost existential, hey, here's one part of his personality, then it leads to this present, and then we meet Cusack, and it goes
There's a really
into
good
the future.
quote from Paul Dano, who plays past Brian.
Right.
He says, quote, "It's important to see the juxtaposition of the two people, especially when you see Brian in the studio so vital, and then see the older Brian quiet, almost traumatized. There's a mystery there. How did that person become that?" And that's in reference to like the fact that they did get two actors to play the same man,
which helps with that, and,
it does.
And that's the thing that's kind of interesting, that maybe makes it it moves it a little bit away from being a straight biopic, in that there's a little bit of that artistic kind of license there.
And it's funny, like I don't know if this is a criticism. I mean, I'm sure people criticize it for this, but the fact that Paul Dano, whatever, went through such effort to look like Brian and sound like Brian. And then Cusack, who doesn't really look like him at all. I think acting wise, he does sort of embody him.
Does some of those mannerisms.
He doesn't. They didn't do anything to make him look like Brian. But there is a quote from the director saying like, well, in 1985, he actually did kind of look like that.
Right.
Like he was slender, he had dark hair.
Yeah, and
hey, wait a minute. Sounds like it's time for an episode of Sound and Vision. Sound and Vision. That's right, it's time for Sound and Vision. We'll discuss all things aesthetic using scale provided to us by David Bowie. Glenn, if we really like something, we call it low. That's right, low, David Bowie's masterpiece. Tim, if we don't like something, we call it
Never Let Me Down.
Never Let Me Down, which David Bowie definitely let us down. David. Come on, David. Come on.
You son of a bitch.
Come on.
Fuck you.
Jeez.
David Bowie. Never let us down. All right.
And then there's a comfortable movie line.
Let's dance.
Let's dance. Dave Bowie's okayest album.
Okay, so
all right, so
we're
let's talk
talking
about
the movie
look,
in general?
Just the look of the movie in general. And I mean, it's a big topic of conversation with this. I mean, I get, Dano's got the haircut and he, gained a little bit of weight. Other than that, he doesn't look a damn thing like Brian Wilson.
He's got a round face.
I don't know. He's
probably too round of a face, actually.
They get, clothing and all that. But he doesn't, you don't look at this guy and be like, oh, that's totally Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
Cusack looks nothing like him.
Right.
All right, it's a big topic of conversation, so that's something that deserves to be discussed here in terms of sound and vision, I would say. But I think in a more broad sense, do we feel like they captured the look? Like, I think in this movie when you are watching the 60s versus the 80s, so that's good.
Yeah.
Doesn't come off as, super heavy-handed.
No.
When they switch from one to the other.
No. There's a different color palette, too. Like, we were talking about, the characterizations of the two different ages of Brian, but, just overall, the sound and vision, the aesthetic of the movie, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I'd give the whole thing a low, for sure.
100%.
I want to point out, we talked about the director and writer, but the cinematographer is Robert Yeoman, he's shot every single Wes Anderson movie. In this one, there were a lot of scenes, I guess all the studio stuff and some other scenes were shot on 16 millimeter film, just handheld. It's got that cool, grainy sort of look to it in the 60s segments. And then the 80s is more sterile, more blue, which I think is a great way to separate the eras and kind of just his life at that point, over medicated and all that stuff is really represented by the look of it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, I guess, costuming and hair and things like that for the characters themselves. And I think that was really well done as well.
There's a couple of like the montages with the bed, and you have the headboard, and it comes down to Cusack, and then back up and to Dano and to Child Brian.
Yeah.
There's some really kind of interesting, cool, thoughtful things that are done there. I'd also like to say this is not a made-for-TV movie. This is a friggin'
this is a real movie.
real Hollywood budget. We've got stars. It's done really well. We've got legitimate cinematographers and writers who are like, I feel like it got the treatment that the Beach Boys deserve, or that Brian deserves.
Yeah, it's interesting because they do sort of recreate some iconic shots, like the Sloop John B video.
Yeah.
It's almost disorienting, where like, oh wait, like Paul Dano's face is here, not Brian Wilson's. Like that's weird because they are like shot for shot, them carrying him into the little raft into the pool, and the whole him and Carl switching places.
And that whole
thing.
like opening montage with like the Tammy show and like the surfing safari shoot and things like that. Yeah, like really fine attention to detail.
Yeah, I think the '60s scenes look fantastic, as you mentioned. Again, handheld thing, and again, I think it's just the '60s vibe, the '60s aesthetic. I think is great. When it shifts to the '80s ones, I'm like, I don't like this as much, but it captures the 80s aesthetic, which I don't like as much, and which is also, like you said, kind of designed to capture a little bit more about what his mentality was at that point, too. Like the sterile white and blue kind of color scheme, rather than more the earthen tones of the 60s, the warm reds and oranges and things like that you see a lot in the 60s part.
And I will say also, like, one of the things Cusack has come out to say is that this Love and Mercy was kind of meant to be almost a companion piece to the Don Was documentary. I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Came out in '95. I started watching it, putting it back on again, just to kind of see where the conversation, because that's what kind of Pollard points to as the reason he wanted Cusack.
We're just going to call him Robert Pollard.
Pollard, okay, yeah. But he said, having watched that Don Was documentary, that I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, Brian at that time period was giving very kind of a John Cusack, and it has kind of that darker feel to it, and so worth checking out. There's good stuff there, especially because this is notably a biopic, and as opposed to a documentary, which we've seen a bunch of different stuff along those lines. I give it a low. It's a low for me visually.
Yeah, I'll go along with you guys. I mean, there's the part of me that wishes that they had somebody who looked a little bit more like Brian with all the resources of a big budget, but you also want decent actors too, right?
Right.
And I don't know of any great actor who's gonna look a lot like Brian Wilson necessarily or whatever. And I think they did fine.
I would argue also that you don't want it to look like Brian, because I think it does something different, much like the Bob Dylan one did. It makes us realize that this is not this is a retelling. This is not him. They're not trying to like fool us or blend those lines. There's plenty of that trickery going on. Like, I mean, there's moments where we hear Paul Dano and then all of a sudden you blink and we're listening to the actual Beach Boys recording. Like, they've done some really cool mixing in there to kind of trick you. I don't think I wasn't expecting to squint and think I'm seeing Brian Wilson.
Maybe, I don't know, but like,
a lot of times,
I think there's things that they could have done. Like, I don't know. Neither of you guys saw the Dylan one then?
I haven't, no.
Okay. Because like, I think is it Cate Blanchett who plays like main 65 era Dylan. Like she looks more like Bob Dylan in that movie than either of these guys look like Brian Wilson.
Right.
So I don't know.
I think a lot of times in biopics, the main actor will kind of just do an impersonation of the person. As opposed to acting and trying to internalize what's going on within them. Yeah. It's just like trying to sound and look like them. And Dano's already doing a lot of that. And if they had gotten an older actor to do the same thing, I think that would have been too much.
Yeah.
And like Cusack has these little like physicality things where he's got like his palms kind of facing backward. And he has all that, which I guess you could call an imitation, but he's speaking in his regular voice. He's not like wearing a wig. I mean, maybe he is actually, but you know what I mean? It's a little bit more. There's more craft to it.
They're more interpretations than trying to be replications,
for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think both of them. I mean, there was even an interview quote where
hold on a second. We got to close out that episode of Sound and Vision.
Oh,
good episode.
It's low.
Yeah.
Good episode.
Yeah, I'll go along with the low. All right, back to what you were saying, Glenn.
I mean, I'm just saying that they talked about how Dano and Cusack intentionally did not exchange notes, so that because they didn't want it to be that slick.
Yeah.
They didn't want it to be that kind of forced. They wanted those to be separate identities, and if they did look just like him, and that would have lost the effect that. Man, these are two different personalities.
Right.
These are two different. This is pre-Brian and post-Brian.
Right.
What happened? Why are they so different?
And it's like he said in that quote, just like this one is traumatized.
Yes,
and like
exactly.
Timid and
I think
afraid.
that emphasizes even more so the trauma that he went through because they're so different. And if they looked too much like Brian Wilson, I think that wouldn't have driven that point home of how much the trauma devastated Brian.
It would have been cool to see Philip Seymour Hoffman just playing future Brian altogether.
Ooh.
I mean, he's so good.
I would have liked to see Jeff Bridges play future Brian altogether too. So,
but I do like Cusack here. I think he does a really good job.
Yeah, he does. I'm not mad at it.
Yeah,
I think they both do fine. It's always tricky when you are. Well, I'm not that I'm speaking from any experience as somebody who's ever acted, but like when an actor is having to play somebody who has such interesting or idiosyncratic like personal foibles as Brian Wilson, because there's like this kind of, I don't want to say cringy, but I kind of just did. It's almost like it's just an awkwardness, but you have to kind of take on those parts of the person who you're portraying. But there's a weirdness, I guess, to that, and then to see it sort of amplified by two different people taking on just some of those personal tics, if you will, of Brian Wilson's, are kind of there's a little bit, I don't know.
I gotcha.
Disorienting, or that maybe takes you out of the idea of this as the movie experience.
How do you feel about, and this, because this is a little awkward to me, but Paul Dano literally learned how to play piano and sing for this, and you talked about how they kind of blend the voices, but there are parts where it's just him singing, and like how do you guys feel about that versus if they had just had him like lip syncing to a real trained singer? Because for me, it's like I think he does a good job, but I know that he worked really hard to get to this point, so it's almost like I'm like kind of on the edge of my seat, like, how's it gonna sound? Is it okay?
The only part where it really bugged me was when he was first playing "God Only Knows" for his for Murray,
just with a bong.
And it's just like really, really stilted, and you're like, Brian wouldn't have been playing it. I don't think in such a like again this heavy hand stilted kind of way.
That scene might have been a very subtle kind of like one shot montage kind of an idea, because the camera just kind of spins around him the whole time until it reveals that Murray's there. And at the beginning he's playing
like
these
he's
very
growing
simple
in confidence as he's
or like he's literally in the process of writing the song, because the chords start off really simple and he's tentatively singing, and by the end it's like a full thing, and
I totally got that. I loved that scene because it was almost like if he had been playing it perfectly and beautifully, it wouldn't have been believable that Murray critiqued him. It's like, and that was part of it, is like, how could Murray possibly critique God Only Knows? Like, this is like an amazing song, and that gives it a little bit of believability that, maybe Murray's just trying to push him and be constructive, because he craps on it.
But
like, he's like, you just played God Only Knows for me, and you could do better. It's not, what is this?
I'm saying there was, maybe it was supposed to be like magical realism, where like there was literally supposed to be passage of time there. Kind of like that scene where you were talking about where Cusack is lying in bed in his like beachfront home, which does not have a big headboard. And then they pan up to show the big elaborate wooden headboard that when he was stuck in bed for 3 years, and like little things like that. This one, if that's what the intention was, it would have been the most subtle example in the whole movie because you don't see any lighting changes or anything like that. You don't see like the empty couch at the beginning and then suddenly Murray's there. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of how I interpret it. Yeah.
Well, let's take a quick break. A little bit of a long segment there, so we'll take a quick break and come back and talk about some other aspects of this film.
Yeah.
All right, we're back talking Love and Mercy, the Mrs. Wilson story.
See, before we get into some specifics, what are you guys' thoughts just on like biopics in general?
Okay,
It's hit and miss, man.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for a biopic. I
kind of am too.
Mostly because I like watching a biopic and I like getting lost in a click hole of Wikipedia and like researching how much of that was, so I appreciate that aspect of it. But it can be a slippery slope.
I just like, I am a sucker for biopics too, but then I always feel like there's an asterisk or like I enjoyed it, but is it really a real movie? Like Walk the Line, I like a lot, but it's like, again, it's like a guy doing his best impression of Johnny Cash, whatever. I don't know. That's James Mangold directing. It's a really good movie. But I don't know. Sometimes that's the vibe I get. This one feels more like an art piece almost than a biopic. It feels like a real movie to me. But what do you feel? What are your thoughts on biopics in general?
I just feel like sometimes they're so... They take so many just liberties with a person or a group's story just for the interest of trying to make it a narrative, linear, easy to follow. And even though this one does avoid some of the tropes, as it gets into the later phases of the film, it does sort of have to kind of, I think, embrace some of that stuff. Yeah. And Brian's story is so complex and so difficult, even as somebody who now is 46 episodes into this thing. There's still aspects where it's like, this is confusing, following who was where and at what point was this Landy's first, second, or third involvement in Brian, like all of that stuff. And so they have to simplify it because they're making this thing for a mass audience that had like $10 million budget or something like that. It can't be this like, it can't have such an esoteric appeal like that, only us are going to go see it or whatever.
Right.
But I also do think that as somebody who is like really a big fan of an artist, like it can come off as a bit reductive. Sure. I guess. I think in at least trying to frame it in a somewhat unique way, I guess is fine. But
this one, like instead of trying to reduce his whole life story into a movie, it's like specifically pet sounds and specifically meeting Melinda and freeing him from Landy.
So they at least do that. It still does try to clean it up, I think, a little bit too much, but again, we'll get into some specific commentary on this.
I disagree with that. I think it does enough that as much as it needs to the average, theater goer. Like, yes, it reduces a lot of the backstory and the history and stuff, but I think it just gives you enough of what they do, of what they needed for the average viewer in order to tell the story of Pet Sounds juxtaposed with Melinda and Landy, which I think is really well done because you're right. Biopics oftentimes have to reduce, and there's no way you can tell the Beach Boys story. Again, 46 episodes in, there are so many different aspects. You could go watch, Beautiful Dreamer and just look at the smile, thing. You could go back and just look at the Charles Manson stuff. You could just look at the surfing. or the Murray Wilson drama.
Yeah. There's a lot.
There's so many different storylines, and I feel like they did a really good job kind of focusing on, again, the Mrs. Wilson story. That's an allusion that Van Dyke Parks tweeted out referencing this project.
Because she was very involved.
She was very involved, and it is kind of Melinda Ledbetter centric. The story
is. Yeah, she's like the hero.
She is kind of the hero of this, which, again, that's another interesting piece of the Brian Wilson Beach Boys story, is this unreliable narrator how much of this is, whose perspective is this, and how much of this is, because clearly, did you guys pick up on this? But clearly there are three villains in this presentation. There's Murray and Land.
Oh, wait a minute. It sounds like it's time for an episode of Heroes and Villains.
What?
Yes, that is right. It is time for an episode of Heroes and Villains.
Are you trying to make it sound like this is not authentic?
And the villains of whatever it is we happen to be talking about this week. And this week we are talking about
the irony is that was the smoothest transition.
I was going to say,
Heroes and
there's plenty
Villains.
of times where you've tried to tee it up and it has just completely gone over his head.
Well, I know, because I don't like the subtlety of a jackhammer approach to it. Like, I want it to happen in a more, I
was not expecting us to do an episode of Heroes and Villains at this point.
Absolutely were.
I was not. I was pointing out to the fact.
We begin with the heroes. Robert Pollard.
Oh my gosh.
Bill Pollard.
Oh.
Pollard. Pollard. He's a Pollard.
All right. I guess, are we containing the heroes and villains to real life or to in this film? We're talking about alternate realities here.
I think a little bit of both. So, like, in the real world, Melinda, in terms of this film, is I don't know how much she had to do with making the film happen, but she was there as a consultant, and whatever. I think she's kind of a hero. But I think the director,
Pollard,
the writer, cinematographer, all those guys, I think they really
elevated
they did
the film.
It's better than it probably had any right to be.
Right.
Brian was not super involved. Mike had some dumb things to say about it, obviously, after the fact. So,
but again, back to what I was talking about.
That catches me by surprise, actually. Yeah, I would not have expected Mike to have bad takes on this, or really anything.
Within the movie, obviously, like you're saying.
Back to what I was saying, it was very clear that Murray and Landy and Mike Love were the voices in his head tormenting him. Those were whenever he was having freak out moments and he was hearing, "You're not good enough, you can't have a hamburger, stick with the formula." It was always those three voices. And that felt very like true to that narrative, that story. And that was the aspect of this story, and you needed to have those pieces. They could have gone into, any number of Charles Manson and all the different aspects, but those were the critical pieces that you needed to tell this snapshot of this story.
Yeah, and it's a snapshot. It's like very specific time periods,
which is why I thought it did really well as a biopic. Right. Because it did that. And yes, the average audience needs to latch on. You have to succinctly and quickly understand that Melinda's the hero and Gloria's the hero. Yeah. And these are the villains, and that makes for a strong narrative. That is a clear narrative. I mean, Gloria. I
forgot about her in real life. But it's kind of a nice nod.
All right. Yeah, obviously the film is very not subtle when it comes to setting up the heroes and the villains, right? So you got them all there, including Mike and his stupid hat. Yeah. And,
there's several no
Mike and his stupid dancing even shows up. So, obviously the villain.
Even in some of those horror montages when young Brian is freaking out, there's like little scary cuts to Mike dancing.
Oh,
doing the little jive. I was like, yes,
that's right.
That's right. That is horrific.
One of my favorite things is that it implies even that Brian's dog doesn't like Mike.
That's right.
Because they talk about like the picking up on bad vibrations. It's barking at Mike.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, is that the end of the Heroes and Villains?
Yeah,
okay.
That was fine.
Good, because
not our best episode of Villains.
Someone sucked the energy out of it right at the beginning.
No, just the premise. Were we talking about heroes and villains in real life or in the movie, or of the
Villain.
making of this movie?
Matt is the villain.
No, Glenn
Shut
is
up,
the
Matt.
villain.
Shut up, Matt.
No, that's not what the site is.
Instagram.
Yeah,
it's
it's
called.
shut up,
Glenn.
Glenn. I mean, let's just be accurate here.
Yeah.
So as far as biopics, though, like what this movie doesn't do a lot of, I mean, there's a couple little moments, is that it doesn't try to mention all these other things, like like if it was trying to distill the whole story down, you got to have someone toss in a line like, "Oh, remember when Dennis was best friends with Charles Manson?"
Right.
Or even like there's the part where
We've survived that.
Yeah, we can survive anything. And there's the scene in the tent in the living room. Then he gets out, and then he goes over to the piano in the sandbox. But there's no one says, "Check out this giant old tent we got," for hotboxing. And ever since I put this sandbox in the living room, I feel like I'm right there on the beach.
Which the made-for-TV movie
does all
really
kinds of that
does.
shit.
Right.
Yeah.
But this one does much better.
Doesn't do so much of that. There are moments like at the restaurant in the future time period where Brian talks about his dad being abusive in his ear and stuff like that. But that, I think, is just part of him and Melinda, like he's kind of bearing his soul to her.
And again, that Brian talking about spanking versus how Murray just
that's right.
grunting is like straight up from the beginning of I Was Made for These Times. There's an interview that Brian gives that it was pretty much lifted directly. I want to talk about casting. Yeah. We've talked plenty about Dano and Cusack. I mean, Giamatti is pretty great as Landy. Super villain.
He has that. I mean, I guess you could say that he is sort of one note, but it's like that's kind of what it had to be, because like we said, you do have to have these like villains.
Yeah.
And like he can't have any redeeming qualities in this context.
Right.
He probably doesn't in real life anyway. But he has that perfect where like he's talking to Melinda like, this is a sodium bomb. You can't have that. And he's just like he's in control. But trying to be friendly, it's just like, oh, this is great. We all love Brian, but but then like if you cross him at all, then he gets just like. He becomes like a real prick like he's yelling. He walked that line of like sort of putting on a polite air, but really being a piece of shit.
It was pretty one note though, evil. Yeah. Like you just got creepy vibes when he like corners Melinda at the car and is like, "We're in this together, right? I can trust you, right?"
Well, and it's even right off the bat, just that he shows up ominously, as they're having the conversation, kind of in the background.
Like, the jump scare.
Well, no, the Cadillac scene. I love that scene because you see these just people kind of hovering, and then Brian locks the doors. Yeah,
but I don't know, like. As you said, really kind of one note, and it does take away any kind of complexity of his character. And I'm never going to be a Landy sympathizer in any way, but this is a guy like when he died, Brian's like, we had a complex relationship, but I loved the guy. Like it's almost like he's portrayed here as like the burglar with the sack of money that has a dollar sign on it. So you know what he's really doing kind of thing. And it's like, I don't know, they could have done with a little bit more subtlety, I guess.
Right. But like I said, like, just
I feel like some of that was there for the purpose of the movie.
And the same...
There was enough of that there, though. Like, there was enough of that. Well, you could look between the lines and realize that he did, to some extent, he did save him. Like, to some extent, Brian says that a couple times. Is like, yeah, he saved my life. Like, I was, devastated in bed. But then he just kept going and kept going and kept going. And so, like, I think there's a little bit of there. I would have liked it not to be quite as one note.
It's definitely boiled down to, like, the abuser and victim sort of dynamic, but, I think it works.
But, like, also, the flip side of it is Melinda Ledbetter is a hero, and she's angelic and perfect.
Right.
But, like, I mean, there are, what is reality? Because there are there are perspectives wherein she's trying to maybe get some influence over Brian, or maybe she's cashing in somehow. Like, it can be viewed that she is just kicking Landy to the curb so that she can be the new Landy.
I don't know. I really don't know the specifics of the real story there, but like, there's that scene in the movie that goes out of its way to establish within the movie, she's at the restaurant or whatever talking to Gloria about like,
she doesn't want anything to do with him.
I don't
She's
want people to think that I want something out of Brian, or want to be another voice telling him what to do. So I'm going to just step away for now.
And again, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is Van Dyke Parks has mentioned that this is the Mrs. Wilson movie.
Right.
You know, does that allude to that maybe this isn't 100%, you know, maybe. And again,
but in terms
the
of
world's
drama,
not black and white.
And
there is
movie
gray.
making.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And like, the history of the rock criticism is so littered with misogyny that it's like very difficult waters to wade into.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not irrelevant to mention that she does not only marry him, but she becomes his manager.
Right.
She's involved in creative decisions. She's why they recorded a country album for some reason in 1996. She, as early as the mid 90s, was wanting to make a biopic about her husband of just a few years. Like, I don't know. There is this like personal, creative, business relationship that's established really early on. And yeah, I think this film has, at least if nothing else, there's a vested interest in presenting her in as positive of a light as possible.
And to be fair, Mike Love has done a lot to help the Beach Boys, but this podcast is way more fun when he's a jackass. And we emphasize, well, there it is. See? Done.
Yeah.
Proof.
yeah. I mean, for all I know, she's great and wonderful. I mean, Brian thought she was great. So.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And she was of critical importance to his eventual recovery and his ability to become a functioning human first off again, but also, of course, an artist who completed his second masterpiece and who has, continued to, in his later years, thrive in a way that, a couple decades prior, nobody would have ever thought would have happened.
Right.
So
that said,
to back what Glenn said, people are not black and white; they're complicated.
Right.
And this movie just kind of presents this: nope, Landy evil, Melinda perfect.
Right.
And the thing is, people are way more complex than
correct.
that.
Right. And in the same token, if you were to think I know all I need to know about the Beach Boys because I've seen Love and Mercy, there's more. There's more to it. This is only just one little slice of it. Just like saying, oh, I know all I need to know about the Beach Boys because I've heard Pet Sounds. No, there's more to that. Yeah. And, you need to do that. If nothing else, take away from this that this is the story of the Eugene Landy, Melinda Ledbetter aspect of the saga.
Well, and it goes beyond even just like the positive portrayal. Like, there are just some straight up inaccuracies as well too, in terms of how Brian got away from Landy.
All right, let's talk about this. How much of this is
Melinda is not the person who like completely separated him from Landy.
All right, so what is the true story here? How does he get out?
Apparently, word on the street is there was like a Beach Boys super fan, right?
Really?
Who encounters Brian at some sort of a like event or whatever, and really is the first person who raises the red flags of like Brian displaying some signs of something far different than what he had been diagnosed with, under Landy's care. Who was then? I see now. I'm talking about inaccuracies, and I'm not going to be accurate myself. I just assumed that you guys did a lot of research.
No, I mean that's the thing.
Do.
See, I thought there were a lot of actual accuracies, like the whole him leaving the note, frightened, scared, lonely in the car.
Well, that's entirely possible. I'm not saying that everything is accurate.
Well, sure. I mean, nothing.
But essentially, it was this person who passed on information. I think it was to like David Leaf.
Yeah, something about Leaf was being involved. Yeah,
who was the biographer, Beach Boys historian, who then was the person who contacted Carl,
right,
to start to initiate the action to extricate,
But
Landy from the situation.
Was
that was not
the will
initiated.
involved though? Like
the will was like the critical
Right.
piece of evidence, and that was, and I think the housekeeper was very much involved, I think, in that, but it was also like somebody also within like Landy's camp as well too, like internally, who said, we've discovered this about the will.
See, if you can't even articulate this as a super fan with all of the access, the average movie viewer aren't going to be able to.
Right, it's better to boil it down for a movie.
You got to boil it down. So
Yeah.
whether Melinda actually was the one and, Gloria snuck in off the printer, I don't think is the point.
But the idea of the will being the
if it's
linchpin,
just totally not what happened. I mean, it is an important point.
But I mean, if the will was the linchpin, like, or the main thing, they depicted that, and with the implication being that it benefits Landy if Brian dies, if he just medicates him to death.
Yeah.
And then he gets all his stuff. He made himself whatever in his will. The movie shows that it's him actually having crossed out sections and written his own name in for this will go to Dr. Landy,
Mr. Black.
So yeah.
Yeah, so it's actually in the Carlin book that you have not finished yet, Tim.
No.
I'm reading from the wiki because I wouldn't read a book. Like, give me a break.
Yeah.
I did enough of that in college. Let's see here. So yes, in the 2006 biography Catch a Wave, Peter Ames Carlin credited Beach Boys fan Peter Room and biographer David Lee for bringing Brian's condition to the attention of Carl Wilson, whereas the film depicts Ledbetter contacting Carl by phone. Slate adds that Ledbetter is aided in the film by Wilson's housekeeper, Gloria Ramos, who, along with Leaf, is given special thanks in the liner notes several of Wilson's albums. That doesn't say anything there about that, but anyway, and then I followed down the rabbit hole a little bit to a couple of other articles where it was like, she was not the person who initiated this, but it was her entering Brian's life that kind of started to set a lot of those events in motion, at least. So again, not that she's not of very critical importance to his turnaround, but that the film takes a very painting with broad strokes, I think, approach to appeal to a mass audience and to make a more simple personal story than, hey, now we're going to introduce this random Beach Boys super fan. And now you got to know who David Leaf is, because you've been following along with that.
But yeah, so I mean, we were talking about casting. Melinda's played by Elizabeth Banks, who does very well, I think. I was going to say, just watching, when I watched this movie, initially in theaters way back when,
we saw it in the theater together.
Yeah, I remember thinking the 60s stuff was so fun, but the 80s stuff was such a bummer. But watching it now, I really feel like the 80s timeline is the main storyline of the movie. And that whole journey is I don't know, more compelling. The 60s stuff just seems like, just kind of nostalgia or whatever. Because it's sort of, I mean, it's not all good times, but it seems like the prequel to the film, almost, even though they're all intercut and simultaneous.
Well, it's like the action of the film.
Yeah, the action of the film
80s
is
and the 60s is more just sort of like the prelude,
Yeah. But Elizabeth Banks, good. Other casting, Murray Wilson, played by Bill Camp. Who,
again, that one didn't
who looks
impress
just like
me.
Jeff Foskett.
I felt like the casting for Murray on American Family was better.
Kevin Dunn nailed it.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, we were talking about the extremes, all three villains are really ramped up to 11, for narrative purposes or whatever. But I thought, Murray and Mike were way more hostile. They were too outwardly hostile. We know Murray, for as much as an asshole as he is, and an abusive father, he was also a goofball. I mean, at least when he was drunk, right? That whole recording, but you get a sense of who he was as a person. He wouldn't just come right out and say fuck you, Brian. He'd be more I'm a genius
more
too.
passive,
all that stuff.
yeah,
Passive aggressive.
Yeah.
All, everything.
This
guy just was too simplistic and too hostile.
He didn't attempt the glass eye. If he had gone for the glass eye, that would have...
Yeah.
And the same thing with Mike. I honestly, one of my notes is I think Mike was better cast and acted in the cheesy made-for-TV film.
Yeah.
This Mike was a little bit too much of a caricature.
Right. And there's that scene where he's just straight up yelling at Brian outside the studio. And Plus, the actor bothered me himself because he just seemed like a douchebag.
Well, I mean, hey, he's doing his job.
I don't know his name, but just like his sort of body language was like. Ooh. Anyway, I'm sure he's a great guy. But also the casting of all
to play Mike Love in a film.
The musicians, though, the studio musicians were all well cast.
Oh, yeah,
they
Carol
were
Kay
basically
great.
real musicians. I definitely recognized the piano player, but I don't like who did the sort of mess up part of Caroline Now or whatever.
I really liked the way
I think it was
that
I'm
they
waiting for the day.
Waiting for the day. Yeah.
I really like the that little moment between Hal Blaine and Paul Dano, Brian Wilson.
Oh, the smoke break.
The smoking
Yeah,
where it was juxtaposed nicely with, you know, poor Brian has this really abusive, traumatic relationship with his father, and then Hal Blaine kind of has this fatherly interaction with him that's way more positive.
Nice.
It was kind of a nice thing that I thought they did really well.
Well, and that's when he's talking about, like, you know, the boys get back tomorrow and they can be kind of tough. But
and Mike walks in with that stupid fucking hat.
It really emphasizes how, like, this is his happy place. And he knows the dynamic's going to completely change once the rest of the guys show up.
Right.
Should we take another break or?
Let's just keep going.
Okay, cool. Because I have more things to say.
All right. Yeah, let's actually take another quick break then.
Yeah. We're talking about Love and Mercy on Talking Down the Highway. And we just talked about casting and characterizations of some of the like the bad guys and I guess the good guys. But what I kind of want to talk about is those studio sequences that I talked about before, shot on 16 millimeter film, handheld, a lot of long takes, tracking shots. Apparently, if you do the Wikipedia required reading, director talks about how, like, they didn't let Robert Yeoman, the cinematographer, in for the rehearsals. They just had, like, the musicians were there. Dano knew he had listened to all the tapes of Brian, in the studio, and he kind of knew what to say and how to act and interact with these people. And then they brought Yeoman in with a camera just to capture it like a documentary, basically. I thought that worked really well. And then, when they start playing, you can hear the room. Like, they're really playing. I don't know. It just sounds cool. It really makes you feel like you're there, like witnessing it happen for real. Yeah. Which I just thought was awesome.
Oh, when they were doing the bobby pins on the piano, I was just getting goosebumps. I mean, it did. It felt like that whole Let It Be, the Beach Boys. You were in the room. Get Back. Like you were in there watching it happen.
But even more so, even more immersive, because the camera's just kind of floating around the room. Yeah. And then when they start hopping between studios for good vibrations, like they go to a Gold Star, there's that one shot where it's like the camera's just on a tripod and it just pans the entire 360 degrees around the room. And you can see, people over here, people over there, like in the background. It's just one continuous take while Brian's doing something. I don't remember. Just like, I don't know. I just really love the artistry of that stuff, but also just like Yeoman's general framing and how... getting away from the studio stuff now, but in that restaurant scene where Brian is spilling his guts in the future, there's a shot that's, it's Elizabeth Banks' face, but then you see Cusack's face like reflected in the sort of headrests. Yeah. I just think it's really well shot and really well.
You're such a film nerd.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, valid. That there's definitely.
Yeah. But, also just recreating the way they cast the musicians and then just capture that whole thing. It's just a real high, I think, in the movie.
Yeah, I like the studio scenes. I always do like that kind of thing. Just, again, more about the musical stuff than the touchy-feely personal things, I suppose.
Mushy stuff.
I remember when we went and saw it when it first came out. I posted something on whatever social media. Like, I thought it was pretty okay, but I would have liked a montage where Brian was shopping for different microphones or something like that, testing out different mic positionings and things like that.
Well, there was the one scene once the boys get back in town to record the vocals for Pet Sounds, where Brian, they're on one mic and Brian's on the other, but it's like a Neumann whatever. It's not that. Apparently, he used that whatever progenitor to the SM57 for vocals on Pet Sounds. It was more like the microphone in the control booth.
Okay,
I think that might have been one of them. So a little inaccuracy there, but that's fine. You don't want to get too deep and nerdy into that stuff.
Yeah, and the thing is, they were actually pretty accurate for a lot of that stuff. It's more the inaccuracies tended to be on the again, the narratives and the historical accuracy of what actually really happened here. So there were a few other notes that I had on that. They depict, Good Vibrations as being created as a response to the failure of Pet Sounds. First off, Pet Sounds was not a failure.
Right,
that narrative is just so tired.
Yeah.
It was a modest commercial success. It was not a flop.
Yeah. I was watching it. I was watching that sequence with my mom and my son, and I had to pause it and explain, hey, that's not how would they, why would they have given, because Good Vibrations was the most expensive single ever.
Exactly.
Why would they give him if Pet
But
Sounds
the thing
flopped?
is, there's also a reason for that. I'm going to get to that inaccuracy in just a second. But Pet Sounds was not a commercial failure. It simply was not. And that narrative is dumb and it needs to just be retired. The thing is, why that wasn't exactly accurate is Good Vibrations. They started working on that during Pet Sounds. It was not a response to anything about Pet Sounds. It was contemporaneous with Pet Sounds. Like the earliest session tapes for Good Vibrations go back to the Pet Sound sessions. It was just they became then much more invested in working on it when they went to work on Smile.
It
or
also
after
makes
Pet Sounds
it,
was done, and it also makes it look
like Mike had a lot earlier input into it.
Oh, I like that piano thing you're playing. No, that's not how it. That's not how it happened.
Mike Love barely wrote a vocal part on the way to the studio because he didn't do any of his homework.
Yeah. Also, in relation to the Good Vibrations stuff, Van Dyke Parks, part of the reason why he really hates this film is that he is not depicted as being in the studio at all, giving any directions on the cellos at the end, the triplet thing. And he says that was his big contribution to the song, and it's just Brian getting all the credit for that. Then it is Marilyn, Brian's first wife, who refers to the number one hit, the biggest Beach Boys selling hit, as a pocket symphony to God.
Right. I had that in my notes too.
That was going to get you. That was going to irk you.
Like the band phrases are pocket symphony to describe Good Vibrations, right? And then teenage symphony to God to describe Smile, and they combine them. Which is worse than using either one.
Yeah. Because that doesn't even make any sense. Yeah, I hope somebody got fired for that.
For that blunder.
Yeah.
Did you also? I don't know if you had this written down, but the movie also implies that Mike Love did in fact sing a take of "Hold On to Your Ego" or "Hang On to Your Ego" in the studio, because there's that whole scene where he's like, "Is this a drug song? Is this a drug song?" But then at the end, he's like, "Okay, well, let's all hang on to our egos and record it." And he puts on his headphones he's gonna go.
And then the specific line that you always hear that he had a problem with Van Dyke Parks. It was a different one.
Right. It wasn't the crow cries, uncover the cornfield.
It was the snuff.
Sunny Damn Snuff.
Yeah. Heroes
Other than that, what are some scenes that we did really? You mentioned a few that you liked, just cinematography shots that you liked. Anything else that stood out in particular for
one of the things that I appreciated about this is I felt like they did a good job kind of talking about Brian's kind of mental struggles and how much of it was drug addled versus mental health. How much of it, I think they did a good job. I mean, that's the other difficult fine line, how much of it is true, how much of it is inaccuracy. And maybe it was me watching it with my 10-year-old son and having to kind of explain what drugs are and
this is your drug talk.
Right. So we were doing a little bit of that, but how much of, because part of the story is that Landy needed extreme measures because he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Well,
Turns out not.
Not. He was just was that how much of that was just anxiety, and was he self-medicating because he had all of this depression and anxieties, and he was, back then they thought, maybe LSD might help loosen this, or maybe, they didn't realize how bad smoking was for you, or whatever, and so, how much of this was it chicken or egg? How much of it was this caused by drug problems, or were the drug problems him trying to self-medicate? I felt like they did a really good job of Brian's kind of like anxiety and like his breakdown on the plane with the voices and like all of this pressure. I felt like it was ambiguous enough, but also like it wasn't like too preachy.
Yeah.
It was kind of allowing you to see what it was like to have that.
I thought the sound design of the movie in general was really good for what you're talking about. Like in that scene with the plane, there's like a mix of what you can and can't hear. Like you've got the internal stuff happening, but then you see the guys reacting and saying things, but inaudibly. And then when he starts rolling around on the ground, you start to hear them. Their voices kind of sneak in there. But then every time, like initially in the movie, when he's just kind of like listening to the sounds in his head, you get the sense that this is like, he's hearing the music. This is where his songs come to him from.
Right.
But then as it goes on, it's more the voices and the criticisms and stuff. But I just thought it was all really well done because it did give you, and the schizophrenia thing. I feel like that because in that one documentary, was it Beautiful Dreamer? Melinda talks about how he did hear voices, and I like that's an element of paranoid and schizophrenia. But so maybe that's where that. I mean, it was probably just Landy trying to diagnose him with the worst thing he could so he could medicate him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I've said that before. I hear voices. Like, I'm constantly inner dialogue and thinking about, and that's what anxiety is, right? It's that.
Well, that's what I guess what I'm saying is like I don't know how literal the voices really are in Brian's case, but they were depicted in this case as more of an anxiety thing, I think, than him like, being told what to do by just disembodied voices in his head. Right. I don't know. Favorite scene, Matt? Or scenes? Studio stuff?
Yeah, I don't even know if they qualify as favorite or favorite. They were or least favorite. They were just things that stood out. I mean, we've already kind of alluded to the Landy jump scare.
Oh yes,
like it's so weird.
Did Bowie
it's
really freak out?
No, no, but it reminds me of the there's the heroic. All right, everything's about to work out, and then the villain. The bad guy just comes in doing the single slow clap, like
you thought you
foiled your plan. Me. Yeah, and it's just like.
But see, I like that narratively because that is there's a scene where one of Landy's goons comes to Melinda's house and says,
"Hired goons."
Gene doesn't know. Yeah, hired goons. Gene doesn't know I'm here. Brian wanted me to take you to see him, and they go to this. It's like an empty recording studio. Brian's sitting on the floor. They have a thing where she's like, you know what? We're walking away. We're getting out of this whole Landy situation. And you really kind of think for a second, like, oh, okay, this is where she pulls him out. But then, literally Landy is in the booth. And he even, I think, clicks on the little microphone, right? And starts talking to them. Yeah. And then he starts playing the, really oh, I'm real concerned, Brian. And what can I do?
So was it a setup by the goon then?
That's what I don't know. Yeah. But narratively, it's great.
She knew Internal Affairs was
drama.
setting her up the entire time?
What is that? Okay. But
sometimes when I get bored, I just make up my own movie.
Oh, good. Yeah. So cheesy, but I don't know. I like the movie enough that I'll give it some wiggle room with that stuff, with all the sort of elevated drama. So I like that.
Well, the thing is, so at that point, how do you depict some of this stuff? How do you find? Not the drama. I mean, the drama is inherent. It's there. But how do you depict it on screen? We found this will thing. Okay, now there's going to be a protracted legal battle. No, we're going to basically recreate the scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey of Brian laying in bed and seeing his past and future selves.
That's the exact comparison I made in my notes.
It's trippy and weird, but it's this very just convenient device for we really don't have any way to depict what apparently happens over the next few years. Because there's 3 years or whatever that passed between when he sees Melinda next, when she almost hits him by a car or whatever, or hits him with her car. So yeah, there's just let's just throw a weird trippy montage in there for a few minutes because like.
I mean, for artistic purposes, I would say that it's the depiction of Brian coming out of his drug-induced haze, essentially. Like, you see him lying in bed, you see the bed era, but then it's all different.
Child is the father of the man.
Oh, God.
Ooh,
all different
points
points in his life, and then he's laying in the bed and seeing himself standing at the foot of the bed, but he's also seeing, Murray and Melinda and all this stuff. I saw that as like an artistic depiction of the haze clearing, and without having to go through all that, any sort of boring courtroom scene or anything like that. Like, this is a way, like a montagey way, just to get to that end point, without the movie being 2.5 hours long.
I appreciated it.
Yeah, I like that part.
I appreciated how they sped that up.
In the 2001, I mean, it's funny how on the nose it is. I literally had to pause it and like look up just to see, because I thought his exact arm positioning on the bed was the same. It's not quite.
He reaches out and it's a birthday cake instead of the monolith.
But it's definitely an homage.
Yeah.
Absolutely on purpose.
Yeah.
There's no way it's not.
There's no Star Child though.
No. I'm surprised they didn't. I mean, because they have him as a little kid, but not as a fetus.
Yeah.
Space fetus.
Space fetus.
Oh, we're rating it? We should rate it.
Should we rate it?
It's time. You're holding up your.
It's time to rate it.
Yeah, I don't have any other notes or anything.
Yeah, I mean, my only other note was the casting of Dennis and Carl were kind of not really memorable. I think
I don't even remember Al or Bruce at all. Sound design. I was going to say that dinner table scene with.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all you can hear are the utensils, and then
that's what I was talking about. That mental health,
Sorry.
Actually, yeah, I didn't write a note about that, but I did have some feelings of that. Like he just like flips out on everybody, and this is during the Smile sessions and everything, which.
Yeah.
Everything I have ever read about the Smile sessions was that it was just like one of the most open, warm, like positive experiences for Brian ever of his entire life. Like that everything was going great until that one moment when all of a sudden the whole thing just collapsed.
I think I know why. I mean, was that directly after that poolside scene where Van Dyke leaves, or was that before?
Think so. Yeah, no.
Like I think there were some moments in the movie where they had to like put another Brian breakdown scene in to get to a certain point, because I know that the 60s era stuff pretty much ends with Murray coming in and saying, "I sold the rights."
Yeah.
And that's when Brian's looking at the shelf, all the tapes of Smile.
Yeah, no, that dinner scene is definitely before the pool scene with Van Dyke leaving.
If anything, that's like setting that up, I guess, because once he's in the pool, he's like he's loopy. He's like, everyone get in the deep end, blah blah blah. And then he's Mike is just shitting all over him, and then there's the scene with Murray and the tapes, and like
I think that
was just like the beginning of the.
I always got the impression that the whole Smile sessions was. There was trauma involved in it. That
I think afterwards.
Right. But like retroactively, and I think they were trying to communicate that there was this pressure on that he was doing this beautiful, like his masterpiece, and he had all of this creative freedom. And there was just this pressure of like, oh, this is too weird, and like that whole freak out of the sounds and the pressure. I think
I mean, I'd have to look at it again in order, because like, I don't know why that would come before that other stuff necessarily.
Yeah.
So,
because then it even does the whole he's playing Surf's Up on his own on the piano, and then it shows. Visually, at least, you start to see the fire hats and them recording Distillery's cow, and then you hear that sound, and it just sort of depicts it again as the breakdown, like, oh, he's gone too far, everybody, and it once again presents, as so many other things have, Smile as this music of mental breakdown, which is again a stupid false narrative. It is not a music of incoherence. It is not a music of somebody who was off the deep end. It is gloriously, beautifully complex, highly functional, goddamn amazing music.
I thought the fire sequence looked like everyone was having a great time. I didn't think that was being depicted as like a mental weird breakdown kind of thing at all. But also he did think that he set a building on fire through like mental powers in real life. But I was going to say that piano sequence where he's singing "Surfs Up" is they were trying to recreate that Leonard Bernstein show. There was like a little
Same
owl
shadowing
and like a lamp, almost the exact same thing.
Yep.
Okay. Now I think we can rate it.
We have a much harder time talking about movies than we do about the albums, just because
there's no side A and side B
and everything. Yeah. All right, Glenn wants us to rate it. So
I do too. I like it a lot. I'll give it a Dennis. It's not perfect, so I guess it's no Godfather. So I won't give it a Brian, but I'll give it a Dennis.
Yeah, as far as Beach Boy film pieces. It's definitely at the high end. It's acceptable. It is. I think it's well done. I enjoy it. I appreciate it. I'm leaning more towards Dennis. There are some things that maybe that's just the limit of scope and all that stuff. Maybe I would have done a different way, but.
For me, it's like the historical inaccuracies I don't care about. Like for me, it's all about like the interior struggles, from the two primary actors and just the vibe. Like it's not a normal biopic. It's very specific in what it wants to show and how it intercuts between the two things. And I just think it's a really well done movie.
I was a little bit disappointed in the post credits. Like I felt like there could have been more like alluding to the that there's more to this story. I felt like it just kind of like
those title cards.
The title cards at the very end were like, Landy got his license revoked.
He's
and
dead now.
And the guys got back together. Like I felt like there could have been a better job of like saying, hey, for more, this this kind of thing. But
it's just a movie trope where it's like, he went off to Vietnam and got killed.
Right. So I'm
Dennis?
giving it a Dennis.
All right.
So
giving it a Wilson Phillips over there.
I finished it right as Tim was coming in. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get a chance to really like sort of sit and think, well, what's my rating going to be? What's my Letterboxd score and everything? I'm way less positive about it than you guys are.
Clearly.
I'm leaning Al on it. Under the right conditions and maybe not having to rush through a viewing of it in midday like I did today.
Right.
Maybe I could go up to a as you guys would call it, a Carl, but really a Dennis, because we fucked that up.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean,
where would you put an American Family, the TV series? What score did you give that?
Did rate that? Right?
Yeah, that was.
I don't remember what I rated that.
That's why I think this one gets a bump because it. I think I would way rather watch this than an American Family.
It's funny because, like, I still think about American Family when I think about real life events of the Beach Boys.
I do too. I honestly really think that a lot of the other depictions of certain characters are better in that, and just of some elements of the narrative are just better and more accurate.
I think I gave it a Bruce or an Al, the American Family, a Bruce or an Al. So I want to go a couple steps up.
I was lower than that for that film.
But I was probably a David or something.
I want to say we gave it different ratings for the first and second halves because I think we all liked the first half quite a bit more than the second half.
Right. That's true.
Because the second half is pretty much trash.
So you're saying definitely an Al. Possibly a Carl in the right conditions.
Yeah, like a cold Carl.
No, I'm definitely a Carl.
Cold Carl. No, you're a Dennis.
Well, I'm a Dennis, but I could go for a hot Carl.
Yeah, you could.
Okay. Had to get one more of those in there. All right. But yeah, there you go.
All right. Well,
it's a movie.
It's a movie.
It's a film.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's, whatever. At its worst, it's not bad. It's just again, it is a very complicated story of a very complicated person. And I don't know. My other thing about it is when it was announced, I was kind of hoping like, all right, if they're going to do this, if they're going to make a big budget biopic of Brian, at least maybe it'll lead to some real like genuine widespread recognition. Like at long last, Brian Wilson will be the household name. Like everybody knows who the Beach Boys are, but like Brian Wilson will be like people will know who he is. Like everybody should know who Brian Wilson is. Whereas, like, I don't know, when the stupid Queen one came out a few years back, it's like, oh, all of a sudden all these high school kids love Queen. Like, okay, cool. This mediocre band that has a really lame biopic about them, and now everybody loves Queen, and everybody loves Elton John because they're a Rocket Man or whatever. And like this one is like, it wasn't like a major hit or anything like that. It was like,
yeah, I don't know. I'm not a high school teacher, so I don't know if that's true about those two other movies. But
I don't know. Maybe I'm just.
Well, I mean, if
I like Rocket Man. I didn't like Bohemian Rhapsody.
If Love and Mercy is a biopic, a Beach Boys biopic, I mean, maybe I need to go watch Summer Dreams because that's also a biopic.
I'm curious. But that's not the TV movie, though. Yeah. It's also a TV movie.
Is it a TV movie?
Yeah.
An American Family, then, is a biopic TV movie as well, then.
I mean, the thing is, like, the word biopic, it's
three.
like really biographical. Like, this is more of a biopic because it's about Brian. Like, those other ones are about the Beach Boys, I guess.
Sure.
So, I don't know. You can still call them that, I guess.
If we're rating Beach Boys and film, I like Beautiful Dreamer, the documentary.
I like that a lot.
I like Love and Mercy as far as the biopics of theirs go.
All right. Well, hey.
Yeah.
Let's take one last break. Back to wrap it up. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff that apparently means something. Yeah. We'll be back next week talking down the highway about something.
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 Don't go away.
Yeah.
Stick around.
And, it's Talking Beach Boys on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of posts, at least once a week.
Yeah. You gotta re-up that game there,
I
Tim.
do.
Yeah.
More memes.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, we've been keeping you longer lately. I don't know. Just lots to talk about.
Lots to do. Yeah. Hey, there's stuff coming.
There's stuff coming. Yeah. Yeah. At least like one more episode.
At least one more.
Maybe.
All right.
Well, hey, we'll catch you next time.
Later.
Bye.